Coming up, native deaths from COVID-19 has topped 10,000, and a new effort to track economic data in rural reservation areas. Plus, recognizing an Alaska Native civil rights activist, Valentine's Day, and elders taking justice into their own hands. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
Arizona State University welcomes 3,500 Indigenous students from Arizona and across the nation. It serves one of the largest populations of Indigenous students among U.S. colleges and universities. We created a sense of place for tribal nations to create futures of their own making through community outreach and research, taught by world-class Indigenous faculty where they see a reflection of themselves and their experiences. Find community at ASU.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Thank you for joining us. The United Nations is finalizing a report on how hard climate change is hitting the globe. One example of climate change is in California, where the state has been plagued by wildfires. Now, state leaders are finding that a return to traditional controlled burns created by the Yurok may help protect against future fires. Board Secretary of the Yurok's Cultural Fire Management Council, Elizabeth Zeus, says fire holds a special place in her culture.
For the Yurok people, cultural burning has been a way of life for us. Fire is family. Fire warms our homes. It heats our food. It cooks our food. It protects our land.
The Yurok recently hosted a burning program to educate others about the role and uses of fire in their culture. The Department of Agriculture is announcing a new equity commission, which will include at least one Native member. The commission will analyze how the USDA has systematically discriminated against Indigenous and other historically marginalized farmers. ICT spoke with Colville Commission member Tony Stanger McLaughlin, who says it's a, quote, wonderful opportunity to make changes from the inside out.
I'm humbled to serve in this capacity.
As the CEO of the Native American Agriculture Fund, she has been an advocate for Indigenous farmers and ranchers.
We're playing catch up, and we have not been on an equal playing field. Hopefully, through some of this work, we will be able to equalize some of the former issues that minority farmers have experienced.
The commission will analyze how the department's programs, policies, and practices have impacted marginalized farmers. Then it will provide recommendations to Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack.
We have had a history of discriminatory practices, and it's reflected in a variety of things that we've already done at the department, settling of thousands of claims.
Previously, Vilsack referenced the many national class action lawsuits against the department and said they are reflective of the past. Well, 2 Indigenous women earned gold at the Olympics as Team Canada defeated Team USA in ice hockey. The final score, 3-2, and it was Indigenous versus Indigenous at the Olympic game on Wednesday night. 2 Métis players, Jocelyn Larocque and Jamie Lee Rattray, played for Team Canada, earning their gold medals. Star player for Team USA, Abby Rock, is Anishinaabe from the Wanapitei First Nation. She earned a silver medal, and the win gives Canada the most gold medals in this sport, with 5 wins overall. In Alaska, sewing fur clothing is more than a way to stay warm. It's a way to carry on tradition. ICT correspondent Jocelyn Estes has more.
Margaret Nawcook, who is Inupiaq and Yupik, began learning how to sew fur when she was just a toddler, watching her aunt.
I would always observe her sewing, and it was embedded in my mind. And so presently, sewing is just natural to me. It just happens.
A full-length parka takes 40 muskrat pelts. This one is decorated with mink tails, beaver cuffs, and alternating light and dark wolverine fur with a fox ruff. It took 6 people sewing 6 months to make. A parka like this shows a sewer's skills and
When you see a family with many different furs on their garments, it is the hunter's report card. It says that family has a very good hunter provider for the family to be able to have all those different furs on their garments.
Na Cook is 76. She's been demonstrating and teaching fur sewing at the Alaska Native Heritage Center in Anchorage for 22 years. She teaches weekly classes to help keep the ancient tradition of fur sewing alive. In Anchorage, Alaska, Jocelyn Estes, ICT Newscast.
And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Coming up, meet a Navajo Justice of the Peace celebrating Valentine's Day love. And elders in South Dakota are taking justice into their own hands. Stay with us. This week, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention announced the total deaths for American Indian and Alaska Natives has reached 10,000. 10,000 Indigenous relatives who have been lost from the coronavirus. Joining us today is Dean Seneca, an epidemiologist, to help us break down COVID-19 efforts.
If you look at a lot of the data coming from the CDC, it really is the bare minimum in rates and the bare minimum in numbers. We have significant undercounting throughout all of Indian country. We have racial misclassification that plays a major role in all the data that comes to these different agencies, to the state health department, to our federal partners, at the National Center for Health Statistics. So there's severe undercounting. When I was at CDC, the racial misclassification rate, if you looked at it for other racial ethnic groups, is like, 5, 8, 3. But when it came to American Indian, Alaska Native, it was like plus or minus 23, 26%, which means that there are many cases that are going under reporting. And also when we do data linkages, if we link, our Indian Health Service data with local data in any part of Indian country, we always find a rise in cases. So we can say with certainty that the deaths are much higher than 10,000.
What other issues during the pandemic cause alarm?
Recently is that I read a report that motor vehicle accidents have skyrocketed. Motor vehicle deaths have skyrocketed because people are very pressured, people are intense and impatient during this pandemic. And we're seeing a huge rise in this preventable deaths related to motor vehicle accidents. So, that's something to look at. Also, the other issues related to long COVID, we're seeing that I've read some reports recently that, the virus and the protein actually in the virus impacts different components of the heart, which could have long-lasting chronic effects on your health and can impact you, especially if you have any pre-existing conditions.
That was epidemiologist Dean Seneca. Many celebrated Valentine's Day this week, including Deborah Ann Begay. She was elected as the Justice of the Peace for Moon Valley near Phoenix in 2020. As part of her work, she officiates the weddings of couples from many backgrounds, and she joins us now to share some stories of love.
I've got a lot of stories. I spend a good 5 minutes when the couples come into my courtroom, getting to know them, asking them personal, intimate questions to build a rapport before I actually do the ceremony. And the oldest couple that really sticks out to me, they were 78, and they told me they dated for 28 years. They met in a bar. And they weren't drunk when they met, but they were sort of attracted to each other. They dated for 28 years, what they told me, and they came into the courtroom to officialize their wedding, their vows to each other. And they said it was just like it happened yesterday. So they were very much in love. That really stood out to me. They weren't really used to, the camera or anything like that. I asked them if I could take a photo, and they said yes, post it on Facebook and show, so we can show our family that we actually are married legally now and we're not living in sin anymore. So I was one of my favorite ones. I have transgender couples come into my courtroom. I have a lot of same-sex marriages come into my courtroom, and I love to hear the stories of. I had one couple come in that were gamers. One was in Hong Kong and one was here in Phoenix for 2 years. They didn't know each other, and they didn't even know like what sex each other was. But then they were gamers for 2 years, and then they started becoming friends. And then I realized they were attracted to each other because they had gaming in common. So the groom flew out from Hong Kong, relocated here, and they came into my courtroom and got married. And it was one of the greatest stories, just how love kind of creeps up on you, when you where you least expect it, And I always tell my couples that the best thing you can have to stay in love is friendship. The best thing you can build is friendship, because all the glitz and glamour is going to wear off. They're going to wake up next to you. The breath is going to smell. Their hair is not going to be done. Different things like that. And you're going to get to see them in places and ways that nobody else does. But if you have a strong friendship, you're always going to see them with eyes of love.
That was Justice of the Peace Deborah Ann Begay. When Jolana Begay Krupa was a young girl, she knew she wanted to compete for the title of Miss Navajo. Her dream came true in 2001. Then she wrote a children's book about her experience. As Patty Thalahongva reports, her book, written in both English and Navajo, was recently honored by the American Library Association.
My first glimpse of Miss Navajo was at the age of 7 years old at the Navajo Nation Fair. From that moment, I wanted to be like her.
And so when Jolana Begay Krupa was 20, she entered the Miss Navajo pageant. One of the unique aspects is the sheep butchering contest. It reflects a skill that's highly valued in her culture. And even though she grew up butchering sheep, it was still nerve-wracking.
The part that made me so nervous was that it's all, all by yourself. You get no help. So my grandmother couldn't say, this is the next part, this is what we do.
She ended up winning the pageant. Now, more than 20 years later, her book talks about her experience.
So the name of my book in English is Becoming Miss Navajo, and in Navajo it is Dene Bich'eke Yishle.
She loved reading as a youngster and wondered why she couldn't find books that showed her people.
Well, when I submitted the manuscript, they asked, how do you feel about having one book only in Navajo? And I was blown away by that idea. I'm like, I love it, yes.
She's very committed to helping others learn the language to keep the culture alive. She's the interim director of the Phoenix Indian Center. They offer Navajo language classes, and she also teaches at both Arizona State and Stanford University.
And we have to be the one to make those changes. It's not, anybody else's job but our own. And so I feel like that's my responsibility, is to continue to try to teach what I know. And so that's why I do what I do.
It's a promise, she says, she made to her grandparents to pass on the language. In Phoenix, Patty Thalahongva, ICT News.
What does it take to run for political office? Already, all across Indian country, Native people are announcing their candidacy for various seats. Anathea Chino is the co-founder and executive director of Advanced Native Political Leadership. The organization aims to increase Native representation in political offices across the country.
So Advanced Native Political Leadership was founded in 2016, and it was founded because there was a lack of resources, particularly around ensuring that Indigenous people and Native people were going to have access to political resources that all other communities had. So at Advanced Native Political Leadership, we created the Native Leadership Institute. We are now the premier organization in the country that is doing recruiting and training. We have quarterly trainings. We just held our first one in December of 2021. We wrapped that one up in January of 2022 this year. We will have 3 more through the end of the year. These are national trainings. We had Lieutenant Governor of Minnesota, Peggy Flanagan, join us for the first one. We also had Congresswoman Sharice Davids join us for the first one. So we have people that are very much invested in their own local political systems that are making sure that Indigenous people have access to the same resources and are getting a quality curriculum. There's also a number of state-based organizations, Native state-based organizations that are running additional programming. We are also in communication with them and helping to support them and building up their curriculum. So you can start very local, or you can come to Advanced Native Political Leadership.
What are some of the factors to consider before running for office?
First, you want to ask yourself a few questions. Do you have a strong understanding of the commitment? Do you have the time? Most offices require sometimes late evening meetings. They often have, depending on the office, 30, 60, 90-day sessions. You also want to know what the salary is. Will it be a financial hardship for you? And will you need to supplement your income or make adjustments with your current employer? One of the barriers for running for office is the inability to take prolonged leave from work. So really understanding what a citizen legislator means. And if you know that you'll be having to volunteer for a certain number of period to be a public servant is actually a really big ask. Additionally, you want to know what your support network looks like, because it's so critical that you have people around you that know what your ambition looks like and is going to support you along the way. So this looks like conversations with your partners, with your close friends, with advisors, a circle of what we call the kitchen cabinet of people that are going to be around you and help to make some really tough decisions in the beginning and support you for the launch.
That was Anathea Chino. When we come back, elders in South Dakota are taking justice into their own hands. Stay with us. Racial disparities plague the criminal justice system in Rapid City, South Dakota, where natives make up a fraction of the city's residents, but more than half of the jail population. Today, a circle of elders is playing a direct role in trying to change that. Stuart Huntington has this report.
Chris White Eagle's youth program uses Lakota culture to put and keep kids on a healthy path. He's helping to bring that same philosophy to the criminal justice system as part of the new Oyate Court that takes cases off the state docket and puts them into the hands of a circle of Lakota elders. The goal is to heal those who get arrested instead of punishing them.
When they get in trouble and stuff, just locking them up and just thinking that's going to fix the problem, it ain't. I think with the Oyate Court, we look more deeper into trying to heal them. We get to ask the questions the courts don't ask, get to the root of the problem.
Which seems to be getting results. The Oyate, or People's Court, launched late last year as a new diversion program out of the Pennington County State's Attorney's Office, is already expanding.
We went from going every other week to every week. So, there's growth.
Which means more help for people like Robert Jones, who got into a fight and was facing serious felony charges. He was scared.
When you're just in the Western courts, you don't feel like there's anybody there with you. You know what I mean? You feel like you're alone, and that's what people get so scared of is that the feeling alone, that feeling of something bad's gonna happen.
But he says he was even more apprehensive when his case got switched to the new Oyate Court.
When it comes to the elders being in the circle, it's nerve-wracking because they're really talking to you, saying things to you that make you sit there and think dang, I really need to do better. I really need to get my life together. You know what I mean? They give you that extra push. They give you that motivation because they are your elders. And sometimes that extra push is what you need. And I guess that's what made me really nervous, because I didn't know if I had it in me to be able to sit there and take the extra push.
He did. He's now employed, not getting into fights, and happily raising his infant son. It's the kind of result prosecutors seek. It's the kind of results the Oyate Court, using a traditional indigenous peacemaking approach, many people believe can deliver.
The elders hear that case, They ask questions of the participant, and they get to the real heart of the matter, and then they come up with a plan to address whatever the real issue is. And it's remarkable to see. It's been remarkable to see. And that's really, I think, how we move forward with criminal justice in the 21st century. We're not going to solve problems by incarcerating people. We know that.
In Rapid City, Stuart Huntington, ICT Newscast.
Public and private sectors rely on good data to make decisions. Tribes are no different, and the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis wants to help and is looking for better ways to collect information about the economy. The bank's Center for Indian Country Development leads these efforts. Casey Lozar is the Minneapolis Vice President and Director of the Center for Indian Country Development.
The Center for Indian Country Development is excited to be expanding our capacity to be able to collect data and do economic research to help us better understand tribal economies and to help tribes with decision-making as it relates to evidence-based policy making for their tribal communities. So we are very excited to be expanding our capacity in being able to collect data that's relevant to American Indian, Alaska Native people, and tribes across this country, and to do it in partnership with tribal governments, tribal leaders, and other tribal organizations.
What barriers are there to collecting data?
The Federal Reserve is an independent institution, and so at the center, we say our job of collecting the data and when appropriate, making it publicly available for tribal leaders, for tribal organizations and other policymakers to access that data and do some analysis. We will too be doing analysis on this data to really with a goal of helping to inform policy to grow our tribal economies, both sort of in the short term, but sort of arm Indian country with data to think long-term about long-term economic prosperity and stability for our tribal economies. And currently, right now, we have a dashboard, for example, that we created that tracks labor market conditions in Indian country. We have some reservation profiles that we've developed that through this additional data initiative, we plan to expand. And those are targeting not only just Indian country, but individual reservation communities. And we just see providing additional data will allow policymakers at all levels of government to be able to make those evidence-based policy decisions.
That was Casey Lozar of the Federal Reserve. Another important event this week celebrated the work of Elizabeth Peratrovich, an Alaska Native woman who fought for civil rights. The PBS Kids show Molly of Denali recognized her. Creative producer Yedabe Evans sets up this clip from the season's first show.
In the first episode, Molly and Elizabeth, that aired in early November, we see Molly and Tui experience some stereotyping when some tourists come into town and expect a certain type of native to give them a tour of Kaya. And they didn't want to receive the tour from, Molly and Tui as they were dressed in our modern clothing. And Molly and Tui were very upset, and Grandpa Nat and Layla, part of their, family came in to share, like, this has been going on for a long time. And Elizabeth Peratrovich stood up for our rights in 1945 to say that racism wasn't okay, and helped to pass the first Anti-Discrimination Act that Governor Gruning signed for our state.
Tui, your grandpa told me what happened to you today. If I had been there, I would have given them a stern talking to.
I'm a little glad we didn't have to see that.
I asked Myrna to tell you about when she saw Elizabeth Peratrovich.
You actually saw her?
When I was just a little girl.
You were a little girl? I mean, of course you were. I'm just trying to picture your story.
In 1945, Elizabeth was in Juneau. stores in Juneau still refuse to let Native people in. Elizabeth wrote letters and talked to lawmakers. She helped make a law that said you couldn't discriminate. You couldn't be unfair to Native people. Finally, the day came to decide on passing the law. I was watching.
I must remind you, Senators, that Native people are treated unfairly in this state. How do you think Native children feel when they see signs that read, "No Natives allowed," and aren't allowed in the same school as white children? Today, you can tell the world how we are treated is wrong and pass this law to make discrimination in Alaska illegal.
After Elizabeth's powerful speech, the law passed. People couldn't keep Native people from entering a store or movie theater or anywhere else.
Elizabeth Peratrovich was amazing.
Yes, she stood up for Native people, and it changed the minds of so many.
This coin reminds us of all the hard work it took to gain equal rights for Native people.
But there's still a lot of work to be done.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For more news, visit IndianCountryToday.com. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives. I am Aaliyah Chavez.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.